As a point of review, MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, MIDI. It was developed in the early 1980s, 1982 I think was when the specification was solidified, and was originally developed by Dave Smith, who was working at Sequential Circuits on the Prophet 5, which was the synthesizer he was working on at the time. The MIDI specification states that MIDI has parameter values from 0 to 127. Also, it can carry 16 discrete channels of information over one cable. Now, even though we generally speaking don't use very many actual MIDI cables anymore, the protocol is transferred over USB cables, over Ethernet, or over a local area network. Still, this protocol is current. So 16 channels is what you can transfer at one time. And 0 to 127 is your parameters or variables that you get to work with when you're using MIDI. MIDI is a computer protocol that essentially allows one synth to talk with another synth in a language that they both understand. Now, with the advent of this capability in the early 80s, shortly thereafter, they came up with a concept of sequencing MIDI data. What that was similar to recording, except you're recording all of this information. You're recording the MIDI information. You're not actually recording audio. In Pro Tools, we have a digital recorder, and we also have a MIDI sequencer. Even though they do very similar things, the media that they do it with is totally different. Digital audio is not MIDI data, and MIDI data is not digital audio. Some students get that confused. So MIDI, we're just recording all of the information we get from the keyboard, the velocity, how hard we hit a key, how long we held the key, what note we were holding. Synthesizers that can receive more than one channel of information are often called multitimbral. In other words, they can play more than one instrument at a time. And a lot of the synthesizers that come standard with Pro Tools are multitimbral synths. So they can play more than one track of data or channel of data at a time because they can load more than one instrument at a time. There are two track types in Pro Tools that support MIDI data. The first is the MIDI track, and the second is the instrument track. Though they both can record and play back MIDI data, they do have differences. The MIDI track can only play and record MIDI data. The instrument track can play and record MIDI data, but it can also house a virtual instrument. In other words, you can place a virtual instrument on an instrument track. The reason for that is that the instrument track is a combination of tracks, really. It's a combination of a MIDI track and an auxiliary input track. The MIDI track, in this case, stores the MIDI data, but we still need a source to play the audio because MIDI isn't audio, so we still need some type of track that can pass audio. So in this case, our auxiliary input track is a way for us to route our audio from our virtual instrument to our speakers. A MIDI track just has MIDI data. An instrument track has both MIDI data and a way to route audio to our speakers. Now, this should help you understand that if we are using a MIDI track and we want to hear our sounds, we're going to have to use both a MIDI track and an auxiliary input track to house our virtual instrument in this case. And that will route the audio to our speakers. If we're using an instrument track, all we need is that instrument track because essentially it is a combination of a MIDI track and an auxiliary input track. Okay, we're back in Pro Tools now. We're going to add some new tracks for the purposes of recording MIDI and playing back that MIDI data through a virtual instrument. So, as you know, the shortcut for adding a new track in Pro Tools is Shift-Command-N. We can also navigate using our shortcuts. And using the down arrow button, I'm going to add a new MIDI track. I also would like to add a stereo auxiliary input track as well as a stereo instrument track. Now that I have my track selected that I'm going to add to my session, I think it's important time to talk about the differences between these two track types in Pro Tools, tick-based and sample-based tracks. Tick-based tracks are tracks that are based on a specific beat and bar location. So if you select a tick-based track, the beat and bar location of the data will always remain in the same beat and bar location, no matter what your tempo is that you select. So that's a tick-based track. For the most part in music, you're going to use tick-based tracks for your instrument and your MIDI tracks, because we want our MIDI data to always be located at the same beat and bar location if we change our tempo. Audio tracks by design default to a different track type called a sample-based track. What that means is that your audio on your audio track will always remain at the same sample or time location. If we locate something, say at measure 6, and it is a tick-based track, like this MIDI data here, I'll just record something. Okay, now I've got this MIDI data, it's located in measure 6 to measure 7. If we change our tempo, this MIDI data will always stay between measure 6 and measure 7 because it is based on the beat and bar location. You will see that the MIDI data changes its time location because as we slow down the tempo, it's going to take longer to get to measure 6, so it will occur at a later time. If we change this and allowed this MIDI track to be a sample-based track, in other words, time-based track, then this MIDI data will always occur at 12 seconds. In this case, when we change the tempo, you'll see that the MIDI data remains at 12 seconds and does not follow the tempo change. That's the difference between a sample-based and a tick-based track. For the most part in music, we always want our audio and or our MIDI data to follow along our beat and bar location, so we want tick-based tracks.